If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
Good morning. We are here on behalf of the President and the Congress of the United States of America. Thank you for allowing us to honor a fellow Navy veteran who served with honor, courage, and commitment. We'll unfold the flag, fold it, and present it to the family. We'll also like you to join us in saluting our fallen hero, Navy veteran.
We come together today in humility and hope because we know that we are not alone. He was a faithful servant and a true friend to so many in this place, in this congregation. I love, and I don't know if we have it, but I love the picture of Viona and Louise riding in Glen's convertible with the top down, joyous and free. When I first began serving this church, Glen was the coordinator of the deacons, a job that he did for many years. He was meticulous and organized. He had been a businessman, after all. It was a joy to know him and to serve with him. And although he never came right out and told me many of the details, I gathered from our conversations that Glen had experienced his share of joys, as well as perhaps more than his fair share of disappointments and loss. He was a private person and a keen observer. And although he rarely spoke out in groups, I sometimes knew what he was thinking when he would give me one of those knowing smiles. You know the ones. As well as one of his great hugs. There were times for Glen, and probably for most of us, when connecting with this community and the practice of prayer, were primarily antidotes for his feelings of isolation. Now, we have learned in reading through the book of Job, as we've done the past few weeks, that God does not have a checklist of good and bad results to met out to those who deserve them, good or bad. Prayer meaningfully connects us to others who share similar hopes and fears and celebrations and grief and longings. Whatever finds its way into our lives. It is important and powerful to share our joy and our sadness with one another. It is a primary purpose of faith to show others that they are not alone. Each of us is a part of something much bigger than ourselves.
His passing. Glen had been a member of First Christian Church for a long time. I was so fond of him. He was so cute. I loved Glen. I loved talking to him. I loved some of his remarks that he would make, his wit. He sat behind me, as Christy pointed out, right over there. And so I could hear him. He had a nice voice. I could hear him sing. He had a really nice voice. And since I can't sing, I appreciate that. He had a wonderful voice to share. So I felt pretty good that I was able to enjoy it. You know, I have so many fond memories of Glen. I too remember him driving in that convertible, also with that little hat on that he always wore. And when after he'd lost so much weight, it was like the car was so big, and here was Glen, you know, and he would look over at people as he drove by and smile and wave. I remember how he treated some of our elderly people in our church. He worried about Elizabeth. He watched after Elizabeth. He sat by Elizabeth. He walked with her. He gave her his arm for support. He also did that with Louise Johnson, as you may remember. Elizabeth loved him dearly and appreciated Glen so much. I remember his generosity. His generosity in giving what he cared about. Sometimes something very important to him, he would give away. Did you know that Glen loved cookies? You know, right after church, he would go right back to get his cookies. And Glen would tell everyone, I'm not gluten-free, but gluten-free that we had were his favorite cookies. And if they were gone, he'd find his way into the kitchen to see if there were any left, any put away. He definitely had a sweet tooth. His mother owned a home just around the corner from my house. And it bothered Glen that the house had slowly become in disrepair. And then it was sold. And I remember when he came up to me and he said, there's new owners and they're fixing it up. And we talked about how lovely the home had become once again. That was important to him. That was his mother's home. I can only imagine the frustration that Glen had of anyone attending church and not fully being able to hear, sometimes not at all, what people are saying. He was so faithful. He still came. He still participated. And to be honest, he was faithful in a way that I'm not sure that I could be. I admired Glen so much. He told me on more than one occasion that he came to us at First Christian because Doug invited him. Thank you for doing that, Doug. I think God sent Glen to us by way of Doug because this was the church family for Glen. And like Christy said, Glen loved the church.
The day that I went there to go stay with him, he didn't want me to go in there. He said, "Oh, I don't need any help. I don't need this." And so finally, we made a little contract that for a week, if we could still stand each other at the end, that we'd make it a permanent thing. So at the end, we ended up being able to stand each other. And speaking of cookies, I would buy many packages of cookies, and at night I would hear him, and I'd go up in the kitchen, and there he was, taking them out of there, and he could eat a whole pack of Oreos in one night. And if those were gone, then he started on the ice cream. And he enjoyed my cooking. He ate. We ate together every day, and he used to mess with me a lot. As you know, he had dementia, and there were times I really didn't know. Sometimes he was just messing with me, or if it was his illness that he had. But more times than not, he was messing with me, and he would hide things, put the dishwashing soap in the freezer, things like that. Ask me what I was doing all the time, and he was, when I first stayed there with him, for a lot of the time, for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, he'd be very with it. He told me a lot of stories, and any time that we were in the car, he was always with it, no matter what. He always knew where we were going, told me I was going down the wrong street, pointed out all the things around town and things like that. And a lot of the people walking down the street all moved on. They still come by and ask me if you're okay. One of the neighbors told me a story about him being meticulous. And one of the things we did every day is go out in the yard and pick up all the papers. He would do the leaves in the fall, take the bag over to the neighbor, go, "These are your leaves." He fell off their tree in his yard. He was quite serious about that. And he really, even until maybe the last couple of weeks of his life, he was always meticulous. He always got up and got dressed and shaved and got clean clothes on, and walked in the kitchen and said, "Good morning, sunshine," and sit down, and he'd start singing "Food, Glorious Food." Until he had breakfast. So, and then he has a little dog. One of the last couple of days that he was still with us, I was in his room, and he said, "Don't go anywhere." And I said, "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me, he said, "But I am." And he had a sense of humor right up until the end. And I'm glad that Rick and I were able to facilitate him being in his home, not in a church, and not in a hospital or something like that. So I think he was content. Yeah. I really enjoyed the conference. So it was something I was really glad I got the chance to do.
I met Glenn at a Below Gay Network luncheon, potluck, and a week or two later, he walked by my house with his two 80-pound dogs. Oh, he loved those dogs. He invited me to a Christmas party at his house with all of his friends, all of which but one are now deceased also. But he had decorated the house, it was glorious, and we had a good time. And in that evening, in conversation, I mentioned that we had something going on at the church for Christmas, and the next Sunday morning, he was in his place. Glenn had been a member of another denomination that was homophobic, so he was excommunicated out of that community and was longing for a place to be. And he found out we were an open and affirming congregation, and he was here. It was his home, period. He was my church member, and he was in desperate need. Well, in the hospital, they were giving him opium for painkillers, and Glenn's allergic to opium, and he would go into what's called sundowner syndrome. and pull all of his cords out of his chest. And if the windows were open, it was daytime. If the windows were closed, it was nighttime. And that went on every time he was in the hospital and they gave him some kind of opiate. And no matter how many times I'd tell him not to, the first thing they'd do is give him a blood thinner and an opiate. So it was a hassle all the time if he went into the ER. And he would have panic attacks and go into the ER, and I'd have to come and get him straightened out again and back home again. And he was always appreciative. And that went on for 5 years until Rick came back into his life and took over those duties just about the time I needed to quit because of my own health problems. But Glen was very loving, was a Korean vet, and he spent 5 years in Korea on a hospital ship, and he saw all of the wounded, dismembered soldiers that were shipped from Korea back to his hospital ship. And so he got out and he went to San Francisco General on a GI Bill and got a bachelor's degree in psychology. Came back and helped his mother, once his father passed, with the little grocery store out on Broadway. The building's still there, still a grocery store. But Glen worked in that grocery store for a number of years, and every time we would go to Kaiser, we would run into some lady that would stop in the middle of the sidewalk or the street or the hall and yell, "Glen, how are you? I haven't seen you in years." And afterwards he'd tell me, "She's one of the ones I sold candy to in the store." There's a whole community out there of Glen's candy girls that came and bought candy from him. That's another community that Glen was part of. And then he opened a bar, and it was a gay bar, and he had that for a number of years there. And if you drive by the house out there, there's 2 lampposts on either side of the sidewalk. Those are out of his bar. He brought them home with him just to remember. So when I took him to Concord to the senior gay luncheons once a month, one of the guys says, "You're Glen." This is where I get emotional. "You used to own the bar. We loved your bar." So there's a whole community of gay men who frequented the bar in Vallejo from Concord, Oakland, San Francisco, that would come across a bridge just to go to a gay bar that was friendly. And people would ask, "Glen, you want a drink?" He says, "I don't drink up the profits." He'd have, when I first met him, he'd have a drink or a beer at bedtime. But once he had the heart problem, he never touched alcohol again because the doctor told him not to. And he quit smoking for the same reason. So he had lots of willpower and good sense. So that's my friend Glen.
Love it.
We saw concern for others. As you know, when he was able, he picked up people who couldn't make it to church. And he was always happy to see everyone. He was happy to hug. He participated in the greetings and the passing of the peace, which was a tradition when we could do that. And he loved, as you've heard, the cookies, but especially he loved Cheryl's brownies, and he loved Ted's applesauce, and almost anything else that he could find at the dinners. He was established in his ways, but some of us might call that determined, maybe stubborn, but that's another trait shared by some of us, many of us, perhaps all of us, in some way or another. But he was always open to a conversation and a rethink until that was beyond him. You heard about his dog. Well, I just heard about the 80-pound dogs, but there was a little teeny-weeny dog that he was dedicated to. And that dog's name was Faye. That was not her original name because she was a poundling.
Thing that we never got to see or know about Glen, other than he could sing, was he had perfect pitch as a young man, and a piano in his home with all kind of classic music sheets.
Rose shared on the chat. He says, Glen very much liked my poem, Fill Up My Soul, and I believe he would have wanted the last phrase of this poem read for him. When at last my life is through, let it be said that it was for you. Fill my soul. And John Gross.
Leah, the little things, yeah. I do too, actually.
Is that bigger?
I don't know.
So you.
There you go. Wow, that's a young one.
I'm here.
They're showing pictures now.
Or, you get it, Christy.
Let's see.
Show everybody what's up here on the community table.
Really nice.
Look at that one. This is what I'd see. Bachelor of Arts.
Hospital ship.
Oh, he's a frogman.
Yeah, that's what they were saying.
He's a frogman.
There's a frogman.
Okay, guys.
If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for watching.
Bring my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.